Thank you for joining me in the MPP Power Hour. I am your host, Massimo Palermo. Today I have with me as my guest, Jason E. Hamilton. Jason is a farm boy at heart, slugging bales and milking cows during the summers in southern Ontario. When Jason completed his degree, he was on a mission to get into show business. As fate would have it, in 2001, he reached his goal. Today, Jason is a speaker, and also he is author of Life, the Yurt, and Everything. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Jason to my show. Hello, Jason. Welcome to the MPP Power Hour.
Okay, Massimo, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I like that introduction. It sets things up. I think your childhood and the experiences you have really carry forward a lot of your attitude, outlook, and values that you have in your life. And I grew up doing a lot of farm work as a kid, and one of the things that I like to say that served me well in my life is whenever I've brute force and ignorance. That's usually what served me very well has been, you run into roadblocks in life, and so you throw a lot of energy and stuff at it. Sometimes that works out, sometimes that doesn't always work out.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yes, I totally agree with you. Your childhood, how you grew up totally sets the tone for the rest of your life, right? So, in fact, my books, when I wrote them, has a lot of my own childhood experiences in it as well. So,
yeah.
anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about you, Jason. Give us so tell us about, how this this um this childhood you grew up in a farm. I mean, I find it fascinating because my grandfather owned a farm when I was a kid, and
Yep.
I visited the farm when I was a kid, so I always found the farm to be very interesting. So I'm going to give the audience a little snippet of what farm life is like.
Well, I guess I'll do the first disclaimer. So growing up in farm country, my uncle and my grandparents owned a dairy farm, but my father, we lived on a little farm plot, but we rented that plot. We didn't actually farm it ourselves. But when I probably started in seventh grade or so, getting summer work, and it was in the summer, and it was doing hay. So that was typically what I did for summer work as a kid growing up, was helping other farmers, or when I'd go visit my uncle on the dairy farm, we'd help out there a little bit. So it was, I wouldn't say I was up choring before going to school, not like some kids, but I definitely did milk my fair share of cows, and I definitely did my fair share of hay and stuff. And that was the formative years. It's interesting though, uh, being a little bit older, you look back on that with, oh, so much fondness. But I remember as a kid going, I got to get out of here, right? That
Right.
was, oh yeah, no, that really was what it was. And I think I've been writing for a long time. I actually remember being in that same kind of, middle school years was when a buddy of mine and we actually wrote our first. We collaborated to put together a bunch of short stories into like this little duotang that we had as part of our English class. Our English teacher at the time encouraged us to write it. We were just writing journals and stuff, and it was just these little short stories back and forth. And she kind of read them, and just as a way to encourage us, said you should collaborate that. The good news was it was wintertime, and it was our excuse to not have to go outside during recess and freeze our ass off. So we could stay inside and type this thing out. So yeah, it's interesting too. Your motivations for why you do things changes a lot. And I would say primarily growing up, I think it was really seeking a lot of validation, wanting that outside kind of recognition, which is fine, but it can be a little bit hollow, and that's usually what got me into the disappointing part. Like inevitably, when you're creating something, there's always going to be people that don't like what you do, or maybe they're not connected to it, or maybe it's not well received. And that's been my biggest journey, is to accept that's part of the process, and but not allow it to prevent you from continuing to create. So these last few years have been a little bit more different, a little bit more perspective that I haven't. I've really kind of got beyond that, and it's been good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. So yeah. So yeah, you mentioned you started writing obviously when you were very young in middle
Yep.
school, you said you started as a collaboration, but so writing sounds like has been a passion of yours for a long time. You know, so why don't we talk a little bit about that? Well, actually, let's get a little before we get into that. You started writing as a kid, and you didn't publish anything until later,
Yep.
and but your first passion was also to get into the film industry, right? In the show business, so to speak. Why don't we go ahead and tell us what that was like and how you got there?
All right. That's an interesting. I grew up in, like I said, my background is farming. My dad was a truck driver. My mom worked at the local hospital, and I was the first one in the family that wanted to go on to post-secondary education, wanted to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I I started out, my big thing was I just wanted to, like I said, I wanted to get away. I wanted to, start to carve out my own life. I went to University of British Columbia for a couple of years, but I really didn't know. I didn't really didn't I had an idea about the film industry, but I didn't know anything about it. I think I was probably in my first year in undergrad for my arts degree, and I think I heard someone say, "Well, you can make really good money in the film industry, so you're going to know a couple things that'll tick off in my brain." It's like, "Oh, good money, good money, good money."
Right.
So I had heard that, and I kind of went, "Oh, all right. Well, let's see where that goes." I After 2 years, I returned home to Southwestern Ontario, and then I finished my degree at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. And while I was there, again, you set some things in motion, and you just want to go, all right, I don't want to get 3 years into a degree and then give up on it. I want to complete my degree, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, all right, I'm done. I'm graduated. I'm going to move to Toronto. I'm going to get into the film industry, learn it, and then make my own films. That was the purpose. That was the goal. And so I did. And that's where a lot of the background of being a really hard worker in farm country was very helpful, because the film industry is just, the hours are crazy, and it can be really, really strenuous physical work.
Sure.
Um, I didn't know anybody. I was in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so it went from just kind of getting established, and I would do whatever was asked of me. Could have been a production assistant. Um, Based on a couple of connections, I was working with a guy who he did greens, which was a lot of trees and shrubs and stuff like that. And then I eventually started working in the set decoration department, which turned out to just be a lot of furniture moving, right? For a young
Right.
guy like me, I was probably tasked with a lot of those things, because I was, like I said, brute force and ignorance. Like, let's move it, flip this thing upside down, let's go, right? I'll do
Yeah.
that.
Right. Right.
So that was kind of the early part. But what I found in that initial experience was the set dressing department um, tended to do a lot of their work before and after the production actually happened. You'd be there setting up, could be a living room, could be a bedroom, could be a whole house, and you would go in with the team and you would get that set up, and then your next task would be, after that was set up, well, you could be taking down another set after filming had happened. So I really wanted to learn the actual hands-on part, and I wanted to be on set. So I started to move more towards lighting, and that's where I really understood how the setting up of the camera, the lighting aspect, all the blocking, all the interaction between crew and actors and production, that all happened on set. So I ended up kind of leaving the set dressing world behind, going into the lighting department, and that's what I did for about 12, 13 years.
Interesting.
Gained enough experience
Yep.
and kept on writing. So I wrote the short film called Shotgun Journalism,
Okay.
and it was, a lot of it was inspired by Pulp Fiction, was really big at the time, and Guy Ritchie, who did Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. I can't remember.
I can't remember.
But a lot of those kind of short kind of stories and flipping timelines and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of what was a big inspiration behind it. And I learned a real quick lesson about anything creative. Well, you
Okay.
made it. Well, now what? Right?
Yeah. 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 It's interesting you say that because so a little bit about me. You were mentioning about the set and setting up and arranging furniture. I actually took a course in college, a drama class, It was about writing, I think, if I want to
Okay.
say. But we
Yep.
were talking about plays and we were doing dramas and stuff. So yeah, I was part of this whole create a set. Like we were creating the set, like we were decorating, painting, and whatnot. So that was kind of interesting. The backdrop, the background of setting up a play, right? Not just
Yep.
the acting, everything behind the scenes, right? So it's
Yep.
interesting. You were mentioning all the behind the scenes, right? There's so much work behind the scenes, so much work. Even just the little things like the lighting and the furniture, how everything is set up is so important. And and you just mentioned something about, you learned something about creating, you created a film and whatnot. So when I started out as a writer, I, published my first book. The work wasn't done then. It just got started, literally. Once it went out, now the job is beginning. So you're absolutely right. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to
No, no,
interrupt.
no. This is a conversation. I don't mind. It's all about the sharing and
Yeah,
the sharing the experiences. So you speak to exactly what it took me a while to really understand, and
yeah.
I still think now
Mhm.
you speak to precisely what a lot of creative people hit, which is oh, I just want to create. Oh, I just want to create. Oh, I just want to create. Well, that's
Mhm.
great, but
Mhm.
that's a hobby.
Right, right. That's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, it truly is. So I
Yeah.
did my film, Shotgun Journalism,
Hmm.
and at the time, we're talking, 2000, 2001, and there were, many, 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 many festivals. Each festival, there was an application form and there was an application fee. So I put together, like I financed my film myself and had some people help me out with it. But then you realize that whatever you did for your budget, you know, so much more needed to be allocated to
Sure,
just the fees for those festivals.
sure, sure.
So that was a little bit, discouraging. I did make it into one festival though,
Yeah.
one festival.
Which one?
It was called the Toronto Online Film Festival,
Okay.
and I don't know how long it ran for. I think it was only a few years. So the year that my film was there was the inaugural year, and it was supposed to happen right around September 11th of 2001. That was kind of an
Oh, that
important day.
date. Oh, that's kind of a distracting day, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So needless to say, that got delayed.
Yeah.
But so then they ended up pushing it till December of that same year, and
Uh-huh.
it was great. It was fun. It's always a great experience being around other filmmakers and doing that sort of stuff. But it's you do have to take a step back and go, all right, well, this is a big part of where my career went after that. Was I went, oh, okay, so I needed to learn. I needed to, I did buy some equipment so that the objective was to make more. But then after realizing how much it was going to take, I went, oh man, I mean, just even without the money, just trying to coordinate and collaborate people to get them to help out, because
Right.
I was going to have to finance it myself.
Sure.
It was going to be a challenge. So that's when I went, okay, that's good. So now I'll just focus on writing. So that's
Right.
what I did. And I was the guy who had the cargo shorts on. And in between lighting setups, I would have this little notepad that was like, you know, yay by yay.
Hmm.
And I would sit and I would write, could be journaling, could be, poetry, could be whatever. I did end up during that time, I did put together enough material for a novel that was going to be my first novel, but I didn't I didn't do all the editorial process, so it's still in a very rough state. Um, it's still I'd like to get back to it, but sometimes you create something and maybe the time isn't there for it that you can devote
Sure.
to it. So sometimes you just have to let it go.
Sure. Yeah, and that happened to me as well when I wrote my first book, Desire for Love. I had started it in my early 20s, to be honest, in my mid 20s,
Hmm.
and I started. It's a completely different story than I finalized it.
Yeah,
Like a couple of years back when I finally decided to sit down and just write it, complete it, submit it, boom, and we got it right.
yeah,
So yeah, you're right. And at the time when I was writing, I just wasn't ready to complete it. And really, initially, I didn't really think I'm going to go publish this book at the time because it
yeah,
wasn't. But
yeah.
then in 2020, with the pandemic, Like a lot of us probably had a little extra time on our hands with all the with the shutdowns and everything. I decided, okay, it's time, and I did it, submitted it, done, and yeah, sometimes. And but not only that, but then I started finding myself continuing to write like another part of that story with the other book that you see behind me.
Yeah.
So I couldn't stop. I was just like in that groove, you know. Once you start, you're feeling it. You got to do it. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
just timing.
You're 100%, 100%. I've learned to appreciate that a little bit more. Not force it. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes writing is just about sitting down. You might not feel motivated. You might not feel inspired.
Hmm.
Sometimes just sitting down and starting the act, the
Yeah.
motivation and the inspiration will come.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I did so while I was doing that in the film industry is oh boy, it's a beast. And it really is a beast. It is a much of a roller coaster. I kind of call it like it's like legalized narcotics and a roller coaster all kind of rolled into one,
Mm.
because it could be you work 70, 80 hours a week, you're rolling home at, well, like, because I went into lighting, I was on set all the time. And I think the show that really did it for me, that said, okay, it's time for me to change. I did a pilot for a TV series called Fringe.
It sounds familiar. Was there a movie
It,
called Fringe?
it was a series. It was a
Okay.
sci-fi TV series.
Okay.
It was on for 3, 4 seasons, I think.
Hmm.
And it was probably the longest, like the pilot episode was probably the longest 6 weeks of my life.
One episode took 6 weeks.
One episode took 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So a couple of things to that. So the year that it happened, it was the year that my wife was pregnant with our only first and only child. And that was 2008 when we shot it. It was in winter of 2008.
Hmm.
And as Hollywood is right now in the middle of a writer and actor strike,
Hmm.
there was the threat of it happening right around that same time.
Okay.
So what will happen is that, Hollywood still has money to spend.
Right.
And usually there's pilot seasons. So we're talking, like I said, 2008, before all these streaming platforms and this and that. So the tradition, but you still had all these different, cable platforms and stuff
Sure.
like that. So
Hmm.
all the money that they were going to spend on those pilots, they basically didn't have a place to spend it. So all of a sudden, here comes this pilot's getting ready to go, and they had buckets of money. Like, I think at the time it was the most expensive pilot ever filmed.
Wow.
It was about an $18 million budget. Most pilots are like anywhere from 5 to 9 days, and this one was a full 6 weeks. It was like a mini feature film.
Hmm.
And I always recall the last day of filming, we were downtown Toronto. We were working at the Royal Ontario Museum, and it was a night shoot. I think we started our day, it was like a Thursday night. We started at about 7:30 p.m. on Thursday night.
Hmm.
In the Royal Ontario Museum, we film all night. We go into the day. Usually when you're doing a night shoot, it's, you want dark. So when the sun comes up, you're going to start wrapping up your day. That's kind of the habit that you have. But all of a sudden we get into the daylight, and it's like, oh, okay, we're going to go outside and start working during the day. Okay, so all right, well, we'll get a couple scenes and we'll wrap it up. And it's like, holy crap, it's like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. We should be wrapping this thing up. And we're going past noon. I'm like, oh my God, and you're just a zombie at that point.
Sure.
I think we finally finished at about 3 or 4 o'clock that afternoon,
Wow. And you started
after
7 o'clock. Yeah. After the
the
night
previous
before.
night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Every like it was the kind of a show where you get some shows, and as your day goes on, like your typical shooting day is about a 12-hour day.
Hmm.
Is kind of how they would base it on. When producers are making up their budget, they basically factor in overtime after 12 hours. That's kind of how they generate their day.
Sure.
Um, and what can happen is sometimes if you don't get your day, usually let's say you start Monday morning at 7, you do a 12-hour day, you finish at 8, then you can probably start Tuesday morning at, let's say, 8 o'clock or whatever it is. So that maybe by the time Friday rolls around, maybe you're starting at 11, maybe 12, you go till about 10 or 11 o'clock at night on Friday, and you still have a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this particular pilot, we would start Monday at 7. We would shoot for 12 or 14 hours, finish at like 10. The next day we're starting at 10, shoot for another 12 or 14 hours, finish at midnight. The next day we're starting at, 12 o'clock. Thursday we're starting at 2 o'clock. Friday we're starting at 4 o'clock. And so you wouldn't get home Saturday morning until anywhere from 9 till noon. So
Mm-hmm.
your whole Saturday you're a zombie, and then Sunday you're basically spinning your clock around because you got to start Monday at 7 o'clock all over again.
Wow.
So that was really the kind of like, okay, I've had enough, right?
All right.
With my wife being pregnant and the first child, that was obviously a big event. My wife is originally from New Brunswick. We met on a movie in St. John, New Brunswick, and my son was the first grandchild on her side of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up in southwestern Ontario and farm country, I mean, downtown Toronto to southwestern Ontario is like a 2-hour drive. Even if there was like a really short emergency, my family wouldn't be able to just drop everything to come help.
Mm-hmm.
So we sold. This was the content for the first book, Life, the Yurt, and Everything. We sold our house in Toronto after my son was born. About a year and a half later, we sold our house in Toronto. We had a piece of property in New Brunswick. We went there, built a yurt, and started our life over again. And not an easy process. Not an easy process.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is the book you're referring to.
That is. There it is. There it is right here.
Yeah.
I got a copy right there.
Hold it. Let it focus. Beautiful. All right. So you wrote your first book. Is this the first book that you got published?
This is the first book that I published. I did pitch it to a couple of publishers after I was starting to come up with a concept for it, and had some, interest and some traction. But what I found, it was really interesting because that's another thing you kind of learn about the marketing aspect is, sadly, the yurt was only ever going to be our secondary home, our cottage. It was going to be a place we could go to kick back, relax, etc. And what happened was, any publisher that I was pitching it to, they were expecting kind of a going off the grid or a back to the land or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And in truth, it was more about a transformation from one area to another, and then building something in between.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at the time going, even if we just lived in it for a year, then that might have given a little bit more credibility to the different concept for a story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when my brute force and ignorance took over, and I went, well, I'm not going to wait for that. So I just plowed ahead. I'd been blogging about it, so a lot of the content was on the blog, and that's where it all kind of started to come together. And it just so happened that the year that we built it was another big hurricane came up the East Coast, surprise, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big dome on the top of it, and the hurricane blew the dome off the roof.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So yeah, that was an interesting to kind of live through it. It was more along the lines of the challenge was leaving, a place in a career where I knew what I was doing, and I had, all sorts of work prospects, and saying, no, that's not, it's not all about the money. We're going to move to New Brunswick and start over again. Let's start over again.
And that's what the book is about, right? Starting over.
That's really what it's about. And
Okay.
and unfortunately, I mean, I wish it were a cheerier story, but given what we were going through at the time, it was the most challenging thing that I've done in my life. And I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud of the end result as far as the book and stuff is concerned. And
Yeah.
it's not
It's not a
not an easy thing to do.
happy-go-lucky, happy cheery kind of story.
No,
Not a
no,
Hollywood happy ending that everyone wants
no.
to.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
I got
yeah.
you. And in life, sometimes people need a change in their life, right? And a lot of times people don't want to change because they're just not comfortable. They don't want to get out of that zone. And they may not even be happy with what their current situation is, but they don't want to see what they could possibly do if it could be better. They don't want to take that chance. And honestly, I actually went through a similar, change in my life as well. So, I had to basically, I had a lot of toxic people around me. So
Right.
I had to get
Right.
rid of that toxicity around my life. And ever since I did that, I have been just moving straight on forward and doing all kinds of accomplishments. And you know what? You got to take a chance in life. I was not happy. I was miserable. I wasn't sleeping well. I was just upset. I'm like, enough is enough. Sometimes you got to take control and do it yourself. You got to do it. Take the chance, move on. When you realize what's wrong, when you know what's wrong, you got to make a change. And it's that simple. Not easy, but it's that simple.
No. I mean, I can look back now and I've gone through that crucible, and I think you would probably agree. It is a crucible, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're not, it's not something that you go to a weekend seminar and all of a sudden you come out and everything's rainbows and unicorns. I mean,
Right.
that's just not how it goes. And
Right.
you do have to go through some pain to
Mm-hmm.
get to that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, at the time, I was really trying to make an effort because, again, while I had been working on these movie sets and I would be writing, I had a couple of articles published and I was working on a number of things. And I thought, okay, I can make, maybe I can make a go of being a freelance writer if I
Mm-hmm.
just have the opportunity. What always made leaving my job and my career in the film industry so hard, and this is what I mean by it being kind of a drug, right? Where else are you going to have no experience or no track record, and basically you can work and make $2,500 a week,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Or
Right.
$3,500 a week.
Right. And
When
don't need a PhD to do it. Right.
no,
Right.
no, that was probably the biggest, that was the big thing that I learned was that it was a real mixture of people. You had some people who had family that were, got them into the industry, and you had some people who wanted to be filmmakers, and it's a tough go to try to make your living as a filmmaker. So inevitably you end up behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
driving a truck or pushing lights around or moving furniture or doing makeup, and you can make a very, very good living. You really
Sure.
can.
Sure.
But
Sure.
it's all completely out of your control. It's all completely out of your control. So you're, as much as it can provide you a good living, your own, it's all out of your hands as far as your ability to influence your own circumstance. And I think, you talking about going through, changing, it's up to you as to whether or not you're going to take some ownership of that.
Sure. Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very interesting. And so you're not in that industry anymore, but I mean, I assume you've made some good connections or contacts, right? In case you ever, maybe come up with an idea later, and you might be able to reach out to someone, and they might be able, if they can't help you, maybe they know someone that could. Correct?
Oh, for sure.
Hmm.
And that is kind of where I'm at right now. I'll kind of lead into that a little
Hmm.
bit because there's a couple of books that have happened since. I've written a book about called Finding Asia. So when my wife and I, we were in our early 30s and we were contemplating, whether or not we wanted to become parents. We decided to backpack Vietnam and Thailand for 6 weeks, and that became another book in and of itself, and that was a lot more cheery, right? And I also learned to make it a little bit more of a creative fiction as opposed to just a straight up kind of biography
Hmm.
or autobiography. um but that kind of brings me up to the present day a little bit. So, and I guess I'm trying not to skip around. I'll try to keep this cohesive, but when you go back to marketing, right?
Hmm.
And after I wrote Life, the Yurt, and everything, I think I was part of a writers group or something, and I remember talking to someone else who was an author, and I kind of went, "Okay, I wrote the book. Now what?" Right?
Right.
Right? It's the
Right.
old now what, and they
Yeah.
go, and the person, I forget her name. Her name is Deb. I forget her last name. She said, "Well, if you're a good speaker, that will help you be able to market your book." So I ended up joining a Toastmasters group here in it was in Riverview, just across the river. And at the time, I was starting over again. I was an apprentice electrician. I was a first year apprentice electrician. So, you know, where before I was making $2,500 a week, this time I was probably making 2,500 a month. Like that
Okay.
was kind of
Wow.
yeah.
Yikes.
Oh yeah.
Little
So
sticker shock.
yeah, the old ego was a little bruised, if you know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah,
mean.
yeah, sure. I get it.
Yeah, and I was kind of being kicked around a little bit, and again, you acquire coping skills. Like, so while this was happening, and there I am, I'm a starting over apprentice, and I was working for this guy who his nickname was the White Wizard, but he would go off on people. He would just scream and yell and curse, and I didn't have any other I didn't have any kind of social net to fall on. I literally had to stand there and take it because I had really no other choice.
Hmm.
And you can I found a way to kind of let it glaze over me and not let it bother me. And in fact, he kind of became a character in my book, Prince of Acadia and the River of Fire.
And that is your second book?
That's my third book. It's my
Third book.
first book of fiction.
Okay.
So he became the villain in that book. And it was one of those things where like I would get up and our start shift, we would start at 7 o'clock and I'd get up about 5:30 and I would write until I started my shift. Like I would leave for work about quarter after 6 so I could be there for 7 and I would write. So, finding the motivation, it all fed right into it. And that's probably the quickest write that I've ever had.
Hmm.
Once it got going, it sort of wrote itself.
So being on the set, like you were saying, kind of in the background,
Yeah.
You must have come across some interesting background stories where you might be able to write a little short story type of book with all these kinds of stories, without naming names, of course, right?
Well, I will name drop a little bit because I think it's
Yeah.
a funny story.
Okay.
I'm gonna name drop this one. So, um, I was working on a cable movie called Grey Gardens.
Okay.
This was 2007, and again, this was after my wife and I had backpacked Vietnam and Thailand, and we actually came away from that trip going, you know what? We're not going to be parents. We're not going to have kids. That's it. We're just going to be dinks, double income, no kids, and we're just going to live a great life. So I get working on this movie called Grey Gardens, and Grey Gardens is about the Beale family in Long Island. I see. Okay,
Yeah. Is this in the Amityville story?
no, it's
Oh,
not. It was they were like a society family. Like I think the Beales were related to Jackie Onassis.
oh, okay, okay. Different story. Okay.
Different story. So and it was big. It was the mother-daughter that lived in this mansion on Long Island, and then the whole mansion fell into like disrepair. And so it's about that life. It was based on a documentary that was done in the late 70s, I think.
Okay.
So they do this movie, and the star of the movie is Drew Barrymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I've heard in any interviews that she's done, she's usually pretty bubbly and light and fun.
Hmm.
And she always had a good reputation. She did another movie in Toronto, and she was always talking to the crew and hanging out with the crew, and you develop a rapport with some
Sure.
actors.
Hmm.
But in this particular movie, she was she was inhabiting the character 24/7. She was method acting this character, Little Edie Beale.
Mm.
And which is fine. Actors have the process. I get it. I have no problem with that. Like you couldn't say, Drew, excuse me, I need to move this light. It was like she wouldn't respond. You'd have to call her Edie. No big
Mm.
deal.
Hmm.
In addition, there was because of she played this character from the time she was young into her like I want to say into her 50s or 40s or 50s. So there's a lot of makeup
Yeah.
and that sort of transformation.
Hmm.
A grueling show where a lot of long hours. And so at the end of the movie, we had a wrap party. So all the cast and crew, sometimes the cast goes, sometimes the cast doesn't go. We have this wrap party. And, Drew had enough of being in character. So she kind of cut loose a little bit. We're having a good time. And I just happened to be walking, kind of away from the main bar area. I just happened to go into the washroom and I bumped into her on the way going to the bar. And she was, she'd had a few drinks and she was, you ready to cut loose. And she walked up, she gave me a big hug. She goes, "Oh, Jason, you seem so nice. I really wanted to talk to you. I'm just a hippie valley girl." And I'm like this farm boy from Southern Ontario who've got this big Hollywood star giving me a hug and a kiss. And I go back and I tell my wife, and that night I got my wife pregnant.
No celebration.
So we almost named our kid Drew, but that would have been really weird. So he's not named Drew. His name is Dustin.
Well, you
Yeah.
start with the D, so here you go. Pretty close.
Yeah, exactly. So that was it's kind of an interesting story.
Okay.
But then as far as that goes, I remember working on a movie called Red with Bruce Willis and Morgan Freeman.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce Willis has a reputation of kind of being on his own schedule. They call it Bruce Willis time.
Mm.
And we were on set. We were in the studio somewhere, and myself and another lighting technician, we were standing by all the gear, and we, having a little downtime between the setup, and we're there, we're shooting the shit or whatever, and all of a sudden Bruce kind of comes walking through the middle of our gear, and he looks at us and he goes, "Guys," he goes, "which way to set?" And I go, "Oh, it's just that way." And then Bruce turned around and went the other way. Like he didn't want any part of go to set.
Good. Now he's going the other way.
Yeah, I'm going over here.
Yeah.
I'm not going in
He's
there.
probably like, let me give me a brewski over there.
Yeah. It was really weird though. I think I still have it. Let me see if I can find it. No, I have it upstairs. He had, I don't know what he did, but those novelty places where you can, it's like the big box and you can put your quarter in and you get like this little plastic container with whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He gave us each like a Green Lantern ring, like just this random, like, here you go, guys. Like I got a red one, the other guy got a green one, and then like I said, he went off the other way. I was like, thanks, Bruce.
Yeah. He's an interesting fellow, that's for sure.
Yeah, he is. Yes, he definitely was.
So okay, so you're now you're doing speaking and like we said, you're out of the industry and you're speaking and writing. And are you working on another novel as we speak, or is that down the road you're gonna be doing another novel?
All right, so I'll get you caught up a little bit on what I'm up to now.
Yeah.
So I found it interesting because after I started speaking, I really liked it, right? Like it was a really fun, a different way of expressing yourself, a different way of communicating with people.
Sure.
And I, through Toastmasters, I met a couple people and they were starting to, make money, speaking in front of audiences. And that, my mind was just blown. Like I was like, people pay you to do that? Like I couldn't believe it. So I started asking a couple people about it, and they said, well, if you've got a message and you're entertaining, yeah, you can do pretty well. And I went, well, bollocks. I mean, I'm, the skill that I have as a lighting technician, I can speak with some authority that I know how to rate a food truck and flirt with a stand-in. Like I'm pretty good at those, but that's not exactly something that you can say that is going to be of value to somebody else.
Right.
And so what I inevitably ran into was, in order to find an audience and to practice in front of it, I mean, they want to remember what you're speaking about to them. And if you're going even to like a Rotary Club or something like that, I mean, you want to leave them with something that's going to be beneficial to them. Sure. That's the main thing about speaking, is it's not about you. It's what are you doing to convey that is going to be net benefit to somebody else.
Right. When they leave that speaking ship or that webinar or whatever seminar, what are they left with? Hey, are they inspired to do something, or did they learn something that they can change and help themselves out? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was about that time. I went, well, if I don't have a message and I don't have any kind of expertise, I'm going to have to figure something out and get some practice on stage. So that's when I went into stand-up comedy. I started doing stand-up comedy in New Brunswick. And stand-up comedy in New Brunswick is a lot of driving for very little bit amount of stage time is what it is.
Right. But it's also about the experience, and you'll be able to speak about it as well.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Oh, completely. It's been another step in the journey. Learning how to interact with an audience, learning how to literally deal with that firsthand rejection. I mean, there is nothing more honest and true than a stand-up audience. You'd learn right away whether you're funny, whether the joke is good or not. there's no room for interpretation. You're either laughing or they're just sitting there in complete silence.
Right. Yeah. So, the more quiet it is, the worse it is.
Yeah. And that's another thing you have to learn how to deal with, right? I
Right.
mean, you have to find a way to go, all right, well, that joke didn't land, and find a
Hmm.
way to accept it with some grace, or turn it into another joke or whatever.
Sure.
So I've kind of been doing that, and it's interesting because now I'm back being, in and around creative people. Some people who are there because, um, they're not the most well adjusted. So let's go take our problems out in front and share them with strangers, right? Like that's what
Hmm.
comedians do.
Yeah. Right. Let's share them
But
with anybody but themselves.
yeah, exactly. But so what I ended up happening was, I've met a few people and there's a good community, and I actually have a friend of mine, and she and I are working on a pilot for a TV series. We just finished the first draft a couple weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Nice. And you have the
yeah,
connections, so that will definitely help out.
yeah. That's it's good. It's a good time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of streaming devices, and I think the pandemic taught us one thing. It's like we broke the internet. Like it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Like
we definitely did. We took
we
advantage of it for sure.
We totally did. Like it was so freaky. My son's 14,
Hmm.
and he's been watching this show, and the show's got 4 episodes on. Like it's going to be a full season, but they've only got four on. It's like the third season of this show, and he starts watching like, oh great, this new show's back on. He starts watching the new season. He's like, hey, where's the rest of it? There's only 4 episodes. It's like, dude, this is what TV used to be like, right? You used to have to wait like another week for the new
Right.
episode to come
Right.
out.
Right. Or the summer break, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's the thing with streaming now is now they just only release a few episodes at a time because people are binge watching. And it's hard to, when they're available, it's hard not to want to see the next episode, especially if you have a little time in your hands. So,
that's
yeah.
yeah. No, it's the expectation is, yeah, we can just binge watch the series
Right.
from beginning to end.
Right. Right.
And then once you have fired through all that content, you're like, well, give me more, right?
Right.
Like I'm
Right.
here, I'm here to consume more, and the world just hasn't been able to keep up.
Right. It's like me with the show Cobra Kai. I mean,
Okay,
it
yeah.
like the last season that came out, I wanted to watch just one episode a night or a week to try to like extend the watch time, but I couldn't. I mean, those last 3 or 4 episodes, I couldn't like wait. I'm like, I have
Yep.
to watch it because it was just so close to the end. I had to watch. Thankfully, they're coming out with another season, so probably the final season. But I just love
Yeah.
that show. It's just great. So is this so you shot this TV pilot, you said, or a
No,
series?
a friend of mine, we just written the pilot episode.
A pilot episode. Okay.
Yeah, so I came up with the concept, wrote the synopsis.
So some very early stages. It's
Oh yeah,
okay. Okay.
very
Got it.
yeah,
I was gonna
very
say,
early.
hey, don't forget to give us the link to that so we can help.
Well, this just speaks exactly to what we're dealing with, right? So, you want to get a little bit of feedback.
Hmm.
What
Sure.
do people think about this? And so, and I wanted not industry people or comedians. I wanted just kind of, more like your run of the mill consumer of what they would be.
Yeah.
So I got my sister-in-law to read it, and she goes, "When's the next episode?" I'm like, "I haven't written it yet." Like,
Just slow down.
Jeez.
Well, that's a good sign though, because I mean, if people didn't care for it, it wouldn't be like, yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah,
But getting that kind of feedback, that's actually very positive feedback.
it is. No, I'm definitely very encouraged about that. So each of us, my friend who
Mhm.
was my partner writing this, she's also got a few people that she's getting some feedback on, and we'll kind of
Mhm.
take that
Yeah.
and decide what we're going to change or tweak or keep or whatever,
Yeah.
and then there's more of a package that has to come to it, like, so the synopsis, first episode, and then we really have to lay out what the first season would look like.
Hmm.
Not like full episodes, but let's say you know, a little more developed than each episode would have to be kind of its own synopsis. So then
Sure.
you put that together, and that's what we would then start to pitch.
Sure. Awesome. So once that's all done and it gets into what is that, the green light, as they say in the industry, once you get the
Yep.
green light for that, you need to come back on the MPP Power Hour and tell everyone about it, the exciting breaking news and whatnot. But so in the meanwhile,
Yep.
can you let the audience know where Life, the Yurt, and everything can be purchased?
Right now it can be purchased on Amazon, and the link is I have the link in the
Yeah,
I did have my own author page, my own author website a couple of years ago, but I've been busy doing other things,
right.
everything
Right.
else.
Yeah,
So it's just kind of, it's taken a step back. Like that's
right.
the interesting thing about being creative is it's always with you. Sometimes you can't always give it your full attention that you want.
Sure,
That's just the way that
sure,
it goes.
sure. And
Um,
it's available on Amazon.
yep.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share that link with everyone in the description.
Okay.
So when people are watching it, they'll be able to just click it and go to it and check out your book. And then for everyone else, please subscribe, like, and comment on this video because I think this is very interesting. I think a lot of great things are on the horizon for Mr. Hamilton here. I think it's very interesting. I could say, I tell you, Jason, it's been a very interesting conversation with you, and I really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Massimo. I really appreciate you having this platform and having a chance to speak to authors and let them share their works. It's as we both discovered. I mean, the writing process is about half the journey. That was my biggest takeaway.
The
It's like
writing, yeah, the writing is the easy part.
yeah, yeah.
It really is.
It really is. Yeah, you
Yeah,
feel like you're right. It's like, hey, I've just climbed a mountain. Oh crap, I'm just at the base camp of the next mountain, which is learning to sell it.
that's just step one. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you again. Best of luck and talk to you later. So, if you are connected on my social media sites, contact me directly to make an appearance on the MPP Power Hour. Hurry while there are still spots available. Don't forget to smack those buttons to subscribe and like my video. Thank you for watching.